Hi guys, welcome to Polyphonic Tarot. I'm Prince of Cups 518, and today we're going to be talking about the Nine of Swords. I have moved, sort of, in terms of space. I am no longer at the little table behind me. I finally cleaned off my desk. It was a nice bout of, summer cleaning, I guess, but I'm really glad I did. So anywho, I've got a nice real surface to speak to y'all from, so I'm excited about that. It really is the little things in life. And I hope you've all been well since I spoke to you all last. Again, today we're going to be talking about the Nine of Swords, so we are almost done still with our sword suit. We have come a long way into these minor arcana cards. Let me find the Nine of Swords for us here to look at. The cards from here on out really do simplify themselves as far as meanings. You know, we've been talking about how a lot of these cards are getting more simple in their meaning and more just basic, as opposed to some of the slightly more abstract concepts contained in the Wands and the Cups suits. Both of those suits, because of what they deal with in terms of fire dealing with spirituality and water dealing really with, for me, I interpret water as the connectivity of life. And so those two principles are, of course, very deep, whereas the sword suit is dealing more with the establishment of the individual, as we've been talking about, and all that entire concept of separation, of dividing a unity into a multiplicity, and the consequences that come with that in our daily lives. So, and also we have the idea of as we descend down the planes of existence or down the tree of life, we become more simple, and things go from the ideal to the real, from the complex to the less complex, to the more accessible. Things become less obscure the way the further down we travel down the tree. And so the Nine of Swords is pretty basic. There isn't a whole lot going on here esoterically. The card is, of course, in the Sephirah of Yesod, and is light over here isn't exactly perfect yet. There we go. The Nine of Swords is Mars ruling Gemini, which is important to remember. And so there is, in this card, a very strong card of aggressive, angry energy and very violent energy. Mars, of course, is the planet of war, is the planet of aggression, and lots of energy that can be invested for good or evil, and it is a destructive energy. Gemini, of course, we've been talking about how Gemini is about duality, and Gemini is also the flightiest of all the air signs, being the mutable sign of air. So it is definitely the most changing, it is the most fluid and flexible and sometimes crazy of the signs. No offense to any Geminis out there. My mother is a Gemini, so I gotta watch what I say. But Geminis are known for being slightly crazy people. I do say that with lots of love. But, you know, as we descend through Gemini in this suit, Gemini does constitute the 8 and the 9 and the 10. And the 9 and 10 in particular are particularly disastrous cards. They are particularly negative usually. Okay, it's very hard to spin the Nine of Swords as a positive card ever. And it's actually in some ways easier to spin the Ten of Swords as a positive card for people, even though the Ten of Swords is in some ways worse than the Nine of Swords. I think what is forgiving about the 10, and we'll see this as we talk about the 10, in comparison to the Nine of Swords, while the Ten of Swords represents the finality of the sword suit and all the chaos and aggression of the sword suit finally coming to a finite end, and it's finally transmuting into something different, as in the suit of pentacles or discs. With the Nine of Swords, we have the idea of the number 9, and the number 9 being on the middle pillar and being associated with the moon and the constant changing of phases of the moon, the Nine of Swords has much more of an idea of longevity. And the Nine of Swords and its influence tends to go a lot longer than the Ten of Swords. The Ten of Swords I've always associated as sort of like the guillotine cut. And it hurts, it's painful, it is hard and sad and full of lots of negativity, but it's over, you know, it ends. Whereas the Nine of Swords is this prolonged suffering in this prolonged agony. So this is what he says about it, which is sort of similar. The number 9, Yesod, brings back the energy to the central pillar. The previous disorder is now rectified, but the general idea of the suit has been constantly degenerating. The swords no longer represent pure intellect so much as the automatic stirring of heartless passions. Consciousness has fallen into a realm of unenlightened by reason. This is the world of the unconscious, primitive instincts of the psychopath, of the fanatic. And this also has to do with the fact that this card is associated with Yesod. Yesod is, you know, when we make these attempts to draw parallels between psychological theory and Kabbalistic theory, Yesod is often associated with the subconscious, and really the lower subconscious, not necessarily the unconscious part of us that is more associated with the supernal triangle and God, and this very concealed part of us that is in tune with everything that is, and really is an expression of all that is. Yesod is not like that. Yesod is more our instinctual subconscious, our emotional subconscious, you know, the things that we feel and our reactions to things that we don't necessarily have a logical or conscious explanation for. There are gut reactions. Yesod is very much associated with that. So, so that, I think, is part of why he is saying that this card is less associated with intellect and more associated with kind of wild, frantic emotions. And it is definitely a card that, you know, even though it's on the middle pillar, because of the way Mars reacts in this card, and because of the way we have constantly been, as he says, degenerating down the tree of life, there's no real integrity in this card. There is no real nobility. There is no real virtue inherent in this card to redeem it from the crumminess of its condition. It really is just a negative card, and is a card that does represent evil in a way. It does represent much like the Five of Swords, the way Five of Swords represents, you know, betrayal and evil and people attacking each other for reasons that are not necessarily wholesome, unlike in the Five of Wands. The Nine of Swords is really, it takes that a step further and becomes, and sort of elaborates on the Seven of Swords and the Eight of Swords, because we do have to remember that, you know, being in the astral triangle of the Tree of Life, meaning part of the triad comprising of Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, Yesod really is the balancing and the compromising of the energies of Netzach and Hod, and also some of Tiferet as well. But I think in this case we can definitely see it more as an expression of what happens when you put the Seven of Swords with the Eight of Swords together and simultaneously degenerate at a further level. You know, you get this very persistent idea of just aggression, and it's very limiting aggression in the sense that it's very myopic. It's aggression that doesn't really see outside of its own focus. It really is just being evil and violent for the sake of being evil and violent because it feels good in some awful way. You know, it satisfies some odd subconscious desire. That's basically what we're getting at here. So, on the other hand of it, you know, if you are not the aggressor in the reading, then if you are being aggressed upon, then this does represent, similarly in the way the Eight of Swords represents a mental prison, this represents agony and pain and suffering and sadness and depression and sometimes even physical illness also with this card. you know, that's a traditional meaning for this. All of those things in this card are still imprisoning in some way. They are still confining and still limiting. So we still have that idea, and we also have the debilitation of the Seven of Swords as well, and some of the icky connotations of that dumping into this card as well. So he, to finish up, he says, the celestial ruler is Mars in Gemini. Crude rage of hunger operating without restraint. Although its form is intellectual, it is the temper of the Inquisitor. The symbol shows 9 swords of varying lengths, all striking downwards to a point. They are jagged and rusty, poison and blood drip from their blades. So clearly not a great picture. Very gross, sort of like the Seven of Cups. You know, it's pretty realistic as far as what the energy is about in this card. It's not pretty energy, and it definitely is not gentle. There is, however, a way of dealing with this card, the way of passive resistance, resignation, the acceptance of martyrdom, nor is an alien formula that of implacable revenge. Which I think is interesting. You know, he's saying that you can deal with this card, you can deal with the evil inherent in this card in one of two ways. You can either accept it and say, you know, this is a phase that needs to be gone through, or, you know, something that I just need to endure, sort of tapping into some of your Nine of Wands essence here. Or you can just get even, he says, which is true. I don't know, you know, which one is really best. I think it really depends on the situation, and I don't know that real revenge is really always the best option, you know. I think we sort of have to use our discretion with that, and I don't know that violence meeting violence is ever really a good thing, you know. But then again, sometimes, you know, it doesn't make martyrdom exactly the best thing for us either, you know. So I don't really know if I agree with his advice there. I think, you know, martyrdom sometimes is probably your best bet in dealing with this card from personal experience with the Nine of Swords. I mean, we've all had personal experience with the Nine of Swords and grief and agony and suffering. But I think that sometimes, you know, when we're confronted with a lot of things that anger and frustrate us and make us feel limited and make us feel depressed, it's very easy for us to become angry and to develop this almost this sense of guilt and invert it upon ourselves. And that's also what this card can be associated with for sure. Guilt and feelings of regret can also come into play with this card. But sometimes it's very unproductive to just get mad at the situation and feel like it's just me against the world, and, you know, the best thing for me to do is just be angry about it and upset. And that really just produces more negativity than you actually need, and really doesn't heal the situation in any way. You know, believe me, I personally have tried raging against things like the Nine of Swords, and it doesn't make it better. It really doesn't. And sometimes just taking a pause and really just trying to logically look at the situation, which of course is the exact opposite of this card. You know, the Six of Swords is the opposite of this. Logical analysis of a situation as opposed to just wild, frenetic reaction to the situation, which is what this card is about. You know, taking a step and trying to just accept the situation and accept whatever the world is giving you, and trying to look at what the world is trying to say to you through those messages as well, is oftentimes much more helpful and much more productive than seeking out revenge, you know. But at the same time, you could argue that when the world kicks you, sometimes you do need to kick back. You know, sometimes you do have to have some fight in you. So I really do think that this card and the advice he gives you is dependent mostly on context and on logical evaluation. You know, really, I think that is really the best advice for this card, is just do the opposite of it, you know, as best as possible. Logically evaluate this card and really try to tap into what the sword suit is all about, which is impartiality and making decisions and judgments based on real intellectualism and real weighing and counterweighing of pros and cons, positives and negatives, and all of that, and really making an informed decision based on what, you know, your inner truth is telling you. I really think that that's what this is all boiling down to, you know, and the Nine of Swords represents someone who is disconnected from that truth in some way, and disconnected from that advice, and is really only being informed by their subconscious, by their gut reactions, by their survival instinct, by that inherent need to survive. You know, that's very important with this card. So I hope this helps in a reading. As I said before, it can represent depression, guilt, sadness, feelings of confinement, literal physical illness or mental illness of some kind. It can literally represent mental illness, unfortunately. Sadness, aggression, evil, violence. There's a lot of icky stuff that goes in this card. It is not a polite card. Alright, so I hope this helps, and soon we will be working on the Ten of Swords, and we will be done with the sword suit. Woohoo! So, of course, if you guys ever have any ideas about videos and you want to share them with me in the comments, please feel free. I hope don't forget to like the video if you liked the video, and don't forget to subscribe as well. Thank you to all my new subscribers, as always. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Very much appreciative of it. And I hope I can continue to be helpful for you guys. Don't forget to check out my website as well. Alright, guys, thank you very much, and I hope you are enjoying August so far. Can you believe summer's almost over? I don't want it to be over yet. So enjoy the rest of this nice weather. Bye, guys.